1 in 6 people globally experience infertility. So today we're asking a difficult question. How many employees are silently stepping back?
61% of respondents who were employees said they were scared to tell anyone at work, and 45% of them never told HR. Without your help, I would have quit my job. IVF treatment, for the most part, doesn't work.
We get it. HR admin can be a headache. Most teams are managing contracts, onboarding, compliance, and payroll across different tools, different vendors, and different rules. But companies like 11 Labs and Shopify are bringing it all together with Deal. 11 Labs quadrupled headcount in 2025 across 54 countries. So build your global team with Deal. Visit DEEL.com/NickDayHR. Welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. My name is Nick Day. I'm the CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, and we're specialist global HR recruiters. And today I'm joined by Jennifer Elworthy. Now, Jen is a career and fertility coach and director of engagement at Fertility Matters at Work, where she helps organizations turn good intentions into meaningful workplace support. Today on this episode, she's going to help all of us understand how individuals and organizations can really experience how we can become exceptional at supporting those that need the support when they need it most. So welcome, without further ado, Jen, to the HR L&D Podcast. How are you feeling?
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this really important topic.
I'm super excited as well. For those that know me as well, we talked about it very briefly off air, but I've been embroiled in the world of babies my entire life. So I'm really interested in this conversation. I think it's really important that we have the conversation as well. I think HR departments need to make sure their organizational cultures can move from silence to real psychological safety. I know you're going to help us do that today. Before we jump into the content, let me ask you my first question. What do the words human resources mean to you?
To me, human resources is the human part of that. There are people coming into our business and they are our most important assets. It's the people in your business who are key to everything. And when we think about resources, I just think about ways in which we can support them to do their best, to be the people they are, and to stay in businesses and perform really well.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I'm going to ask you in a minute just to share your expertise and experience and what led you into this work. Before I do that, you mentioned the word human there. So when employees are going through fertility treatment, do most organizations genuinely see the human, or do they primarily see the resource and the disruption?
I would hope they see the human in that. And I think we'll go on to discuss this further, but I think most businesses and most people within the businesses have really good intentions. They're empathetic, they're kind, they want to help, but they just don't have the structures in place to do that. And I guess that's where the resources part comes in.
Sure.
That's the structure that enables them to be kind, empathetic, supportive employers.
Yeah, I guess it was a relatively controversial question to ask straight off the bat. I just think for me, maybe it exposes some organizations that claim to be people first. I want to know if that's really an organizational value or sometimes just language we're using to make us sound like we're relevant, but actually is it really being embodied? Maybe we'll get into that a little bit more into the show. Before we do, let me just give us a platform for today's episode, because you've experienced miscarriage and you've experienced ectopic pregnancy and IVF, all while working at a senior level. But interestingly, your career didn't stall. You were fully supported. And actually, I have to understand it correctly, you even promoted and given a pay rise. So what does your manager understand that so many workplaces still miss? And tell me a little bit about that journey for you.
So I had always been very career driven, ambitious, always performing at a high level. And I knew where I was going with my career. I was a senior level marketer in the media industry. And then in 2015, my world collapsed. I had an ectopic pregnancy, which, for those of you who don't know, that's where the pregnancy implants itself outside of the uterus. And there's no viability for that baby or for that pregnancy. So it either has to be removed medically or it will be passed through naturally. But what happened to me was it was in my fallopian tube, and it ruptured my fallopian tube, and I had massive internal bleeding. I was rushed into emergency surgery. And of course, my baby had died. And I really believe that the moment you even think about becoming a parent, let alone see a positive pregnancy test, you are a parent, and that was a baby. And so the baby had died, and I was treated and my life was saved, which is obviously amazing. But there was just no care for the fact that I had lost something incredibly precious. And I've learned actually since then that people who go through miscarriage are very likely to have PTSD afterwards. And people who have an ectopic pregnancy, because of the risk to life, are even more likely to have PTSD. And I went on to be diagnosed with that. I was having panic attacks. I couldn't breathe. I was just shrinking, really struggling to go to the supermarket. I can remember going to Sainsbury's to buy some milk and feeling like everyone was bumping into me. And of course they weren't, but it's how I felt. And that's a trauma response. I then went on to have another miscarriage at 9 weeks and then another ectopic pregnancy. And by this point, I was an absolute mess. It was really hard for me to be at work. It was really hard for me to perform in the way that I'd done before. When I speak to people that I worked with now, they actually said they didn't know. They couldn't tell that I was still myself. But that brings us on to another point of how much people who are going through this hide it at work and just how exhausting that really is. I found a wonderful mentor who helped me figure out what my career meant to me and how I could still drive forward in my career while going through everything that was happening in my personal life, but also use it as a tool to regain some of the confidence I'd lost and to find some resilience in work. So I then went on to be promoted to Director of Marketing and Communications, and my manager was fantastic, the managing director of the business. He gave me time off for my IVF treatment. I had a lot of time off for my miscarriages as well. And because of the support that he gave me, and I actually said to him, don't take work away from me. Give me the big, juicy projects. I want to work. I want to perform. I want to be here. But I do need time off. I need time off to go to appointments at the last minute. And I need your support and flexibility on that. And through all of that, it meant that I was able to do my job brilliantly. I started to recover emotionally and I went on to be promoted.
Well, thank you for having the courage to share what was a very traumatic story for you. And I know for someone who suffers from PTSD himself or different trauma, I know how debilitating that can be. I think something that resonated with me, the story you just told, but also I went to a talk a couple of weeks ago. Tommy's charity gave a talk that I was attending, and Tommy's is a neonatal charity that supports parents who have gone through some of the things that you've been through. Not the number of times that you've been through it, but I've had a miscarriage, or we suffered miscarriage in my family as well. So I have some understanding of what that feels like the first time. But I think something that Tommy's made relevant to me in that conversation, miscarriage has almost been normalized a little bit in the workplace. It's very common. We understand that I think almost 50% of parents will suffer a miscarriage. But do you think that normalization of it, because it is very common that it can happen, it's almost taken, I personally think it has, so it's slightly loaded from my side, but you're the expert, you might see it with slightly different eyes. I think sometimes now someone suffers a miscarriage, and it means that sometimes the meaningful level of support that we need, that you did get in your employer, actually isn't always where it should be, because it is more common now, because people understand it as being a common thing. Therefore, there's got the level of trauma or difficulty that can be associated with that can be a little bit marginalized. I don't know if that's true, but that's probably the experience that I've seen in the workplace from my limited perspective. I'd be keen to get your view.
It's a mixed bag. So 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. So if you just take that as a stat, it's most people will have some sort of experience. I'm sorry to hear that you've had some experience within your family of miscarriage, but it shows that even if it doesn't happen to you or your partner, you're likely to know someone who has. But that's a stat and it's not really talked about. So you said the stat at the beginning of 1 in 6 facing infertility challenges or being infertile. We also know that 1 in 32 babies are born through IVF. So if you think about a standard primary school classroom, I think about my son's classroom, there's one in each classroom who's likely to have been conceived through IVF. And actually, I think it's more prevalent than that. I know a lot of children who have been conceived through IVF. But also, it's all the other pathways to parenthood. There's surrogacy, there's adoption, there's just having a baby after experiencing loss or not getting pregnant for a long period of time. And so all this is happening in the background, and we know that it's not rare, but I really think businesses think it is rare. They think it's not happening in their business. You've just got to look around you, and there will be people who are struggling with this or who are supporting somebody struggling with this.
So from your experience, what did real meaningful support feel like? What did that do for your own recovery and your own sense of self in those moments?
This was back in 2025, and there wasn't a standalone fertility policy then. Now, I always recommend having a policy. It's a structure that enables a business to really bring their culture to life and offer the support that they want to. So by having a standalone policy, an employee can go to it, find it, and be really clear exactly what they're entitled to as part of their employment. And the policy doesn't need to be complicated. It can just be an intention that we will support you. We understand that this is a challenging time and we're here for you. You were entitled to this many days off through the different provisions we have. And here are some charities you can go to if you're struggling as well. The other thing I think is really important, and again, this didn't happen when I was in my job in 2015, is manager training. But what my manager did do, which I think was absolutely fantastic, he said, I don't really understand. I don't really know what we can do, but we will support you. And that's what I needed, just to hear he's got my back. And then I could ask for more specific things like the flexibility, the time off, managing my own diary, all of that kind of stuff, and getting those big projects as well. So I think it's that policy, it's manager training, and it's creating that culture that people do feel comfortable to say, this is happening in my personal life and there's an impact on that at work. So please, will you help me with it?
It brings into scope a question, and maybe it's more prevalent than I understand it to be. I've been running this show now since 2019, so we've had hundreds of episodes, and it's a subject that we haven't really discussed in great detail. We've discussed the menopause, the perimenopause, and elements that really do impact the workplace that perhaps aren't as discussed as much as they should be. But actually, this is a relatively new conversation for me to have on the show. And the reason I mention that is, you mentioned, or we mentioned in my introduction, 1 in 6 fertility, 1 in 4 suffering miscarriage. And that's just talking about 2 elements. As you mentioned, you've got surrogacy, we've got adoption, we've got, and a lot of these conversations about heterosexual couples, but obviously, basically anyone in your workforce could be going through this kind of challenge, right? So why do we think that these issues are often outside of the main HR agenda? But there's huge elements within the HR agenda when we're talking about equality at work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I haven't seen fertility being discussed or being as prominent in those agendas as other areas have been. And I think I've been guilty of that. It's the first time I've featured it on my show. So it hasn't been in my mind, even though I've been through miscarriage myself. My sister's been through miscarriage and stillborn. My mum has as well. So there's a lot of it in my family. And it's never even occurred to me until we've met and been introduced to bring this very important conversation to the show. So I'd be keen to understand why you think it's not a bigger part of the HR agenda.
It comes down to what we talked about before. It's the myth that it's rare. It's the myth that it's not happening in your business, but it absolutely is. And so often, we did a big piece of research at Fertility Matters at work, and 61% of respondents who were employees said they were scared to tell anyone at work, and 45% of them never told HR. So this is a huge gap there. And also they're saying things to us like, I was worried my manager would think I wasn't committed. It was the stigma of putting anything ahead of my career, of my job. And actually I'm working with a coaching client at the moment who's a doctor in the NHS. And she's been told to do exams and put that ahead of her IVF treatments. So there's all of this kind of stigma. And that's the real life example of when a company or a business or an organization gets it wrong, that they're not supporting someone to be that whole person. For me, I'm seeing fertility changing now. It's becoming the new menopause movement. And yes, menopause will affect every woman or somebody who considers themselves a woman, has a uterus, and will go through menopause at some point. But so does fertility. And whether that's as a grandparent, you're supporting a parent with a grown-up child, you're supporting them through a loss or through their treatment. That could be taking a toll to you at work. How are you navigating that? Do you need to go and be with your son or your daughter because actually it's really impacting them and you might need a bit of time off? Or maybe it's a younger employee thinking about egg freezing. How do they contribute to the preservation of their fertility? What are they doing? What kind of tests? Or perhaps someone with endometriosis or PCOS or any other menstrual or reproductive health condition. This is something that affects absolutely everyone. And as you also said, the LGBTQI+ routes to parenthood as well, that are so much harder to navigate while working. I hear a lot from the community about a sort of second coming out and having to tell people they're gay when they don't feel that they want to at work, and navigating things like adoption. Adoption is an incredibly invasive and long process. And some of the companies that we work with at Fertility Matters at Work, provisions for that with unlimited time off. And you can really see the loyalty from the employees who get that support.
Yeah, you raised some really interesting points. I think for me anyway, there's a misconception that to bring your true self, your best self to work, you have to be able to be willing to share everything about your life. And I don't think that's the point. The point is you should feel safe that if you need to, that you can. And I think you mentioned a moment where some people are fearful that they don't know how it's going to be taken. Some employers don't react in the way that we want them to in terms of support that individual needs. As you mentioned, a great example there of putting the exam before the IVF treatment. Obviously, you're in the coaching room with individuals like this. What are the things that HR and line managers are almost never hearing directly that you hear in the coaching room? And how can we close that gap so that there is less fear, which I think is probably the word we need to use around people talking about these items, because they're worried about it, how it's going to impact their career prospects, their work. They're going to be seen differently. Because that's definitely be the question. I read a Deloitte study recently around the absenteeism and presenteeism crisis we have in the workplace. And it seems crazy to me that we're not addressing these issues more, because presenteeism is a real challenge, and we're not going to be our most productive, committed selves if we feel like we're not supported or we feel fearful about bringing up the things that are most important to us. And I think if you want to have a baby, that's clearly going to be one of the things that are most important to you in that moment. So I just wonder if there's anything in the coaching space that you could share that might help our listeners understand how we can start to bridge that gap.
I hear everything in the coaching room. And that's because I've been through it. So I've created a safe environment in which my clients can talk to me. I always talk about coaching from the scar, not the wound, which to me means I've been through something similar, never the same as what they are experiencing. But the wound is closed now and it's a scar and I'll never forget it. But that enables me to do the work I do and support the women I work with or people I work with. But it's not too raw for me.
Yes.
So by creating that safety, which is something anyone can do within their business, I believe, sharing stories, for example, is a way for me to get that trust built really quickly. And they come to me and they say things like they're really muddled. They used to be really confident, knew where they were going with their career, really clear on their lives. And all of a sudden, they don't trust themselves to make decisions. They don't have much hope. They feel really uncertain about everything. And also they're exhausted so often. A lot of my clients do have really good workplace support, but they're still exhausted from hiding it. Because you're right, we want to create workplaces where if someone wants to disclose what's happening in their personal life, they can, and they can do it safely with no repercussion. This sense that it's a really personal thing. I didn't tell everyone that I was having fertility treatment, that I was having miscarriages. So I was still doing my injections in the toilets, which is just unacceptable in this day and age now. Please provide a safe, clean space for people to do their injections. I'm putting meetings in my diary like I'm going to an ad agency where really I'm just know I've got a blood test and a scan that morning. So it's going to take a long time and I don't know when I'm going to be back in the office. So I just put that in my diary to cover it up from anyone who might be looking for me. And I see that the people I work with, and I saw this for myself as well, they're not making decisions about things to push forward in their career. It's not because they're not ambitious. It's because they're exhausted. They don't know how to do both at the same time. And then it just becomes a bit too much. They're really clouded by all the hormones that they're taking. And so decisions just become really hard. But the thing I really want HR leaders to hear is something a client said to me a few years ago when I sent her a form just to give me some feedback. And she said, without your help, I would have quit my job. So that shows that her provision at work was not good enough. And she, a really high performing person who then went on to be promoted and have a really successful career, would have just left the business. Early coaching, the early workplace support that means that resignation letter is just never written.
Yeah. I think there's another point I'd add to that is either the provision wasn't available or the provision was available, but the environment wasn't psychologically safe enough for them to be able to access that provision. I think it's a two-word thing. So I say that because you will get departments that say, we have the policy in place, we have X, Y, and Z. But if you've got a culture where it doesn't feel safe to be able to utilize those resources, there's almost no point having resources in the first place. They've got to go hand in hand. And I think even using my recruitment lens, you mentioned or you touched upon the talent sort of problem at the end of that she would have potentially quit her job. I'm sure we are seeing people quit jobs all over the country because they don't feel the support is there. They're exhausted and all the things that you've mentioned. From the lens that I look at businesses through when we're recruiting for clients, sometimes you can see when there's a challenge. And I'll always say to line managers, like, how vocal is your team? If your team is really quiet and silent, it's usually a sign there's a problem because people don't feel safe enough to raise what's going on. And actually what happened is people will quit 8-9 months before they actually quit, like this individual you were dealing with. They check out of work, they're exhausted. That's the presenteeism problem that I mentioned earlier because they don't feel support, end up going. And then before you know it, you suddenly think you've got a retention problem. You've lost some of your best workers, your top performing talent, and they've left quietly. They haven't left banging a drum and shouting about the provision. They've just left. And I think that's why sometimes people underestimate how much impact it's having. People leaving, we don't know why. And I think we need to understand that problem. We need to move from silence to safety. We need to feel safe to be able to bring those things up. I think sometimes HR departments might be misdiagnosing what the disengagement is really about, right? They think the employee is disengaged. It's just they're actually just in survival mode. They still love the company. They still love what it stands for and they love their job role, but they're in survival mode. And then it's interpreted as it's not disengaged from the company. It's disengaged because they need that support. So Jen, I'm going to get a little bit off piece. I read an interesting report recently by Deloitte that really talked about the challenge on the economy we're having with relation to absenteeism and presenteeism. The idea that sometimes we're coming to work, but we're not fully engaged because we've got things going on behind the scenes. We quietly quit sometimes in our work way before the actual resignation is seen. And I think this is where people think their departments are working really smoothly. They think no one's saying anything, so it's running well. And then suddenly, before we know it, we have an attrition problem. People start to quietly quit. I wonder if you've got any stats or any resources or research that may actually bring this into real view for people in relation to fertility. HR leaders, I know you're driving culture, transformation, engagement, and now digital reinvention as well. But none of that works without the right people in the right seats. I'm Nick Day, host of this podcast, but also founder of JGA Recruitment Group. And here's what I hear every week from top HR leaders. They say, Nick, we can't find the talent. It's our biggest challenge. And when we do, we can't retain them. Well, that's where we come in. At JGA, we specialize in HR recruitment and only HR recruitment. From executive search assignments placing CHROs to contingency hires finding HR pros to global HR transformational contract placements and every people role in between. Across every vertical and at every single level, we know where the top people are, what motivates them, and most importantly, how to get them excited about your opportunity, even if they're not actively looking. With engagement rates over 90%, we don't rely on job boards. We rely on relationships. We place fast, we place right, and we do it in a way that reflects your brand, your values, and your goals. So if you're building a strategic HR function, please don't leave it to chance. Visit jjrecruitment.com or reach out to me directly and let's build the future of work together.
So our research shows that 38% of respondents have either left or considered leaving their role. And I think that considered leaving is really important. There's a lot these days about quiet quitting, like leaving your job without really telling anyone why, or just staying in your job but not being productive. And we also found that 63% respondents take sick leave during treatment. And anecdotally, that is to hide treatment. So they're either leaving jobs, they're thinking about leaving jobs, they're not being productive, or they're taking sick leave. And I think as businesses, we all know that unplanned sick leave is a hard thing to manage. It's a cost to the business. We also did some research on the cost to business, and it showed that through sick leave, time off, productivity, and actually replacing people who have left the business, there is a £217 million cost to the UK businesses. But it's easy to fix through all of the things we've talked about today, the ways in which employers can support their employees. And actually at Fertility Matters at Work, we have been able to calculate that for every £1 that you spend on being fertility friendly, you get £10 back. And also that employees are really attracted to companies that provide this sort of thing, whether it's menopause, fertility, flexible working, all of those kind of things. They're going to be more likely to want to apply to jobs at your organization.
Yeah, and we see that from our recruitment lens for sure. People are moving, people actually very rarely leave jobs for salary. They leave for other reasons, as we know, and that's the reason people quietly quit. They also join companies for way more reasons than just financial salary in the back pocket. It's these other things, the way that they feel like they're joining a supportive organization. I love the fact that you mentioned the productivity piece. I think that's the hidden cost. If someone feels unsupported, you lose money and work through that. They're not being bought into the business anymore. The productivity suffers. And it's a really hard thing to measure, but we know it's true. We know it's there. We know if we bring our best selves to work, we know that intuitively, right? Interestingly, when you mentioned the £1 to £10 piece, the same study by Deloitte, and people, I'll see if I can find a link to put in the show notes. The study I read was around wellness programs. So not specific to fertility, but it could be pay on demand. It could be other wellness programs that are brought into the Workplace Initiative. But that research said for every £1 invested by employers, I think it was a £4.97 or 91 return. So still very similar. There is a genuine reason to be investing in these kind of initiatives and practices that allow your people to feel more supported, because the evidence is there, whether it's £10 for one or nearly £5 in one. The companies that take this seriously and take a proactive step do see more engaged workforces, less attrition, more retention, obviously the opposite of that, and more productivity.
Absolutely. And I think wellness sometimes gets a bit of a bad name. We think of it as kind of a lunchtime yoga session or a fruit bowl, but actually it's these kind of cultural change pieces, this really building well-being into the support and the culture of your business that really drives that ROI.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Great. I don't know if I would say exactly the right things if somebody came. I'd want to be a really supportive CEO. I'd want to be really supportive of anyone that was going through any of these kind of challenges, right? But we also understand that everyone is human, going back to the human and human resources, that some managers may freeze when they're given this information. They don't necessarily have the toolkit or the skills or the knowledge to know how to support an individual. They want to, they have the right wish to do, but I imagine there must be a training gap as well in how we support people effectively. Are there any tips you can give us? Is there something someone should absolutely not say in the first 60 seconds, or something they absolutely should ask or do to start that early process right? Because we don't want to lose those individuals straight away when we have the best intentions because we've said the wrong thing.
Managers so often want to help, but you just don't know what to say, because why would you? And often I think we see managers who are promoted into people leading roles because they've been really good at their job spec, at their day job. And then we haven't given them those softer skills of how to manage any kind of conversations outside of the more technical aspects of jobs. The research that we did at Fertility Matters at Work showed that 70% of people facing fertility challenges disclose to their manager first. So they go to managers rather than HR. And yet 87% had no training whatsoever. So we're making managers this front door and then not giving them the tools, the key to open that front door. And the harm that can come from that is often a sort of clumsiness. It's kindness, but it's clumsiness and it's lack of training, which is not anyone's fault. So the first thing to remember is you don't need to know the answers. You don't need to fix anything. That's not why they're coming to you. You don't need to understand anything to do with fertility. It's great if you do, but you don't need to share that knowledge straight away. The next thing is just to listen, really listen to what they're saying. And in terms of language, anything that starts with at least is never helpful. I had at least you can get pregnant, which led my brain into this kind of overdrive of but then what happens? All of those kind of things. Or sharing, my friend went here and then, or they had this operation and then they had a baby. Those kind of things. It's really well-meaning, but it's just not helpful. And it makes the person who is disclosing something incredibly personal and private just shrink away and not wanting to share more. I always talk about 4 questions that are really good to ask. So the first one is, how can I support you? So again, you don't need to know the answers. You're genuinely asking what that person needs. And they just feel supported straight away. And listen to the answers. Don't make assumptions on that. The next is adjustments. So what adjustments do you need in your workplace? That could be a space for injections. It could be control of your diary, flexible working, working from home, those kind of things. But again, don't assume. Some people might want to be in the office as much as possible. Some people might just say, I'm going to do both, or I'm going to have a mix, I'm going to be at home more, whatever it might be, but just try to accommodate as much as possible. And it might not always be possible. You're a business. You do have to operate in a way. You can't just be having everyone doing the things that they want to go and do, but make it work for both of you. And another thing, we hear so much of this at Fertility Matters at Work is pregnancy announcements, babies coming into the office. So just ask, if I know that somebody in the team is pregnant, how would you like me to handle it? And then you're not having to take on that responsibility. You're just passing it back to the person who's sharing what they're going through. And the final one, and this is so important, is can I check in with you again? This is really important because the answer might be no. No, I never want to talk about this ever again. I told you what I need. You've given it to me. Don't talk to me ever again. Or it might be, yeah, actually it'd be really good if we could maybe just have a chat every week. Or can I just come to you when I'm ready to share? So just really listening to the answer. And in terms of language, you can just mirror language. So I tend to say miscarriage. So then you'd say miscarriage. If I say loss, you can say loss, those kind of things. So this is all, I hope, giving managers the confidence to realize that they don't need to know the answer. There are really simple ways they can do this.
It's really good to actually clip that little section you just discussed and save it and maybe share it with your teams, because those 4 questions alone are going to really dramatically improve the ability for people to feel safe when it comes to these challenges. Thank you for sharing those. I think they're really powerful. I think also it highlights a shift we've seen in the broader HR marketplace or industry really, which is moving into a more of a coaching mindset. Lead with questions, not with answers. Okay, how can I best support you? What do you need from me? Rather than saying, as you say, I know someone down the road who's done this and it worked for them, which is not what they need to hear. It's leading with those questions and listening. I think that was really powerful, in those 4 questions.
You could also say, what do you like on a good day? And what do you need on a not so good day? So that you can respond to that person and know that on a not so good day, maybe they need you to take them for a coffee, or maybe they want you to just leave them alone. But how can you respond to that person on those different days?
Brilliant. Fantastic. Now, of course, some of the work that you do as well is it's not just emotional support, which is obviously a huge part of what you do. It's also helping people protect their careers. So if we talk about the talent space, the succession planning as well, we know that career ambitions can sometimes begin to feel maybe inappropriate or even shameful during fertility treatment, right? We've got conflicting priorities. It can be very challenging. How do we navigate that? Why do some women feel like they have to even choose between being committed to their career and being committed to starting a family? I think this is a challenge that extends beyond just the world of fertility challenges, right? But I think it's something that could be really powerful. I know it's work that you're involved in.
So I know you know this because you've said it already, but I really want to be clear that fertility is not a women's issue. I typically work with women, and women are the people who it impacts the most because they have to go through the medical processes. But this really is a people issue. So please don't forget men in the conversation as well, and partners. So back to your question, there are 2 things. The first one is that when you're trying to conceive, you are so often told to relax, to not take on loads of stress. So although that's coming across like care and it comes from a point of caring, what it's saying to someone is you can't go through what you're going through and have your ambition. So they just shrink and think that it's not possible. I mustn't do anything stressful. I must just relax and just focus on getting pregnant. But actually then you just sow in your head. And I hear from my clients that they feel like fertility has become their identity. And that's all they are anymore. And the work that I do really opens that up. So I often talk about alongside. What do you want alongside your fertility challenges or treatments? So the other side of this kind of not opening up about wanting to progress in your career or have ambitions is, I hear this as well, but if you do disclose at work, sometimes a well-meaning manager will assume that you want a simple job, a quiet life, no stress, you don't want to be promoted, you don't want to go through training. And that goes back to my point earlier about really listening to the person and what they're saying. Some will want that, and others, particularly the people I work with, don't want that. They want to progress, but they want to do it in a really supported way. And I see it often that the confidence in making decisions is really hard. They're living in this sort of swirl of hormones and emotions, and in cycles as well, a sort of 28-day cycle of their reproductive system. And then they're thinking about things like, well, what if I'm pregnant then? Or what if I miscarry? Or what if I'm in treatment? And then I think any kind of career progression or training or even holidays and simple things like that becomes impossible, and it's easier just to not do it. So when I work with people on this kind of alongside idea, we look at their whole lives and they'll say, I just want to start living again. And through coaching, they can really start to see that the core of them was always there. It's just that it had been hidden away and buried by everything that was happening in their personal lives. And coaching enables people to just open up their perspective a little. And it could be that they go off and they get a new job, get promoted, whatever it might be, the really big stuff. Or maybe they'll just start a really small hobby that makes them feel a bit better about themselves. as the building blocks to that kind of recovery.
It's really powerful. As someone who believes in the power of coaching as a coach myself, I specialize in fear coaching, and that can cover all kinds of elements for where people feel held back. I've got a friend of mine that your answer made me think about, and she's been through 6 rounds of IVF and hasn't had any success. And actually for her, the one thing that's helped her to stay human has been her work. It's been that distraction maybe she's needed. But I want to ask a more challenging question, and I hope to God that my friend is able to have the success she's striving for. But we know not everyone is also successful. They can go through rounds and rounds. It's expensive. It brings pressures on personal lives, relationships, family. And when you talk about fear that I deal with, a lot of my clients will come to me with imposter syndrome or feeling that they're not good enough. And why them? And it could be something, it could be anything. And I'm sure that extends in the world of fertility as well, right? Why am I not good enough? Why am I unable to do these things? How do we manage that as a workplace? How do we create a culture that is super supportive when the outcome, if it does become to a point where you're told it's not possible or you just give up, whatever it might be? Because there are a lot of people out there really struggling. If that was a huge part of their purpose, they want it to be part of their identity. They learn that may not be part of their journey. And actually work can be one of the most purposeful things they have at that point in time. We want to make sure that it's available to them. I know it's a challenging question for people who may be listening to this. Maybe you've been through that journey yourself, that we need to give them that identity, that purpose back. And I think that's where work can play a really important role. But obviously, as you're working with clients every day, maybe it's an opportunity to share some of the work that you do as well. But I'd love to get your views on that.
IVF treatment, for the most part, doesn't work. It's not successful. The rates are really low. And the older you get, the less successful it is. And if you're adding in health conditions, a partner's conditions, all of these kind of things, the rates really do drop. I think sometimes people think about IVF as this kind of silver bullet. Just have IVF and then you'll have a baby, or just adopt. And it's really not like that. I wish it was, but it's not. And the childless not by choice community is big and invisible. And some of the easiest questions that we ask at work is, do you have kids?
Yeah.
And I know I've been guilty of that before. But let's think about some other interesting things we can talk about that aren't that. I really try not to say that to anyone anymore because it can just be really upsetting and it takes them out of the conversation.
At this moment, I need to be more mindful.
Yeah. And we don't want to hide stuff at work. We don't want to not celebrate life achievements or pregnancies or all of these kind of things. But just think how in a professional environment, if a baby comes in crying, giggling, whatever it might be, and someone is either going through fertility treatment or is childless not by choice. And I think we just need to be really mindful of that. If it's all right with you, I'll share afterwards a few people who are doing some really amazing work in this space.
That'd be wonderful.
But supporting that community is key. And it's something that we really raise awareness of at Fertility Matters at work as well.
Yeah, no, I'd welcome that. I think it'd be really valuable. And actually, there's so many reasons why. I had a menopausal expert on the show, and the youngest, I think, recorded case of the menopause is 12 years old. There could be many reasons why it's just not possible for you. And we just need to make sure that people need purpose. That's the one thing that drives us, makes us meaningful work. It makes us most productive, and we find more purpose when we feel supported. So I guess maybe the goal shouldn't be to just help people quietly survive fertility treatment at work. It's to ensure they can continue to make meaningful career choices while they're going through it. So there will be HR leaders, L&D leaders listening to this who are saying, we need someone like Jennifer talking to our team. Maybe we don't have the support internally that we need, and maybe we need to look externally. I know you mentioned there's some links you're going to share at the end of the show. Tell us a little bit about how organizations may be able to get involved with work that you do and the kind of ways and interventions that you offer to support those organizations.
So Fertility Matters at Work offers a membership to become a fertility-friendly accredited employer. And to have that, we ask you to submit a series of evidence to show that you have a standalone policy where time off is detailed, that you have manager training in place. We offer manager training, both as part of our membership and standalone. And that's really important so that managers can respond, so that they're trained to know about these conversations. Could be a resource that they come to in the moment, or it could be ideally one that they've seen previously. And then one of the most important things we do, and this comes from a line that Anne Boskamp said, dies when stories are told in safe places. We really believe in the power of storytelling. So we host events where we share our stories. We ask employees to share their stories. And then we talk through the ways in which a business can support someone. These kind of things just bring everything to life, and they really do create that culture. It can't just be a policy in a dusty folder in the communal kitchen. It has to be something that is living and breathing, both in your managers and in your policies and in the stories and the ways in which people bring themselves to work. And I really believe that the systems behind the culture, the policies, the training available are the things that really bring it to life and make it true and make your people feel like they are safe to bring whatever they need to bring into work.
Yeah, and there's another cliche, isn't there? A problem shared is a problem halved, and you can swap the word problem for story, maybe.
Yes.
And you realise there's community out there. So that's really powerful. I'd rather ask a different question. What's the question I haven't asked? This is such a complex subject. I'm trying to come to you with questions from my male perspective, and I'll be honest about that. There's probably questions I haven't considered because I just have a different perspective because of who I am. There may be something I haven't asked. There may be my other challenges that I haven't considered. There may be other workplace considerations that just haven't come to mind during today's episode. But I really want to make sure we cover the most important ground today because I think it's really important work that you're doing. So I was going to ask what a good fertility-friendly organization looks like, but actually maybe I'll ask you, what have we discussed today that could be really useful for our listeners?
You stumped me there, Nick. I feel like we've covered everything.
If we have, then that's fantastic. I think I was consciously aware of my own, I'm a middle-aged Caucasian male that does have two children. I have suffered miscarriage, but there's so many elements beyond that. And I know that the Tommy's meeting I went to 2 weeks ago opened my eyes to the scale. People they support, over 9,000 families in the last 10 years, they've supported through really difficult situations, the neonatal problems and challenges. And I realized how little I knew. And simple things like saying, have you got any kids? We mirror what we ask. I have kids. So one of the first things I ask is, do you have kids? And I've got to be more aware that just because I have them and that's what I want to mirror, actually, I need to be more mindful. So, yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking about Tommy's event. Was it the Bumped Out events?
It was actually the Wow World Group 20th anniversary. And they raised 2.4 million for the charity. And I was doing a talk there. So they gave a talk at the event.
Amazing. I went to a Bumped Out event run by Tommy's, which was their research report that they've just released. I'll share the link to that as well, because it's really interesting and covers pregnancy at work as well. But in terms of that point about what else have we not talked about, something that's really close to my own heart is pregnancy and parenting after loss. So we often think that when the baby arrives or when you're pregnant, it's all over, it's all forgotten, you've got what you wanted. And that's not the case for very many people. My pregnancy with my son was fraught with anxiety. I was a bit of a mess, to be honest. And I told my manager, and this shows how safe I felt with him. I told him when I was 5 weeks pregnant. I told him 2 days after I'd found out. I hadn't really told anyone else before. But there were so many other people in the business I didn't tell them until I was 20 weeks. And I was huge. I was swollen already from having IVF. And people clearly knew I was pregnant. But I just couldn't bear to share it. It felt so personal and so fragile. And then anyone talking to me about anything logistical to do with the baby, I just wanted them to go away. It felt really invasive. So having some sensitivity about that. And then also the mental health of women and parents after giving birth to a assisted conception child. There's so much about feeling like you should be really grateful, that it should be easy. And it wasn't for me. I had a baby who had colic and tongue tie and reflux and cried all the time. And I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I'll also share a link to a piece I wrote for Stylist magazine about that, because I think it's something to really know about as well, that the rainbow baby doesn't clear all the clouds that have come to you through everything that you've been facing through your fertility challenges.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And also the postnatal depression is very prevalent as well. Like we have, and everyone looks like you've got the thing you wanted is the words you used, right? But actually that doesn't mean that everything's rosy. The postnatal depression is something that many parents struggle with. And actually on the rainbow baby point, it's a good example. So my daughter, I would call as a rainbow baby because we conceived her in what would have been the period of time that our miscarriage had been born. So for me, I felt very differently to my wife in that moment. I was like, our daughter wouldn't exist had the first one made it through. But that doesn't mean that the feelings of carrying the first and all those things that go with it weren't present. So we're together and we're partnership, but we still have to be very mindful and aware that we feel differently. And even though we're sharing the same children and the same things.
Yeah, everyone experiences things differently. You're not experiencing it in a wrong way. It's just your experience of it.
Yeah, it's having that awareness, isn't it? So my last question before I open the vault, and I want to be a bit more, in the world of coaching, let's be forward looking, which I think coaching often is focused on, right? So as we look to the future of work, do you believe fertility support will eventually become as normal in terms of organizational support and consideration as parental leave, as mental health and other areas that we're really seeing in the limelight? Do you think that will happen? And if so, what do you think this kind of time journey is for that?
It has to happen. The fertility rates across the world are declining. IVF is becoming more prevalent. And I was talking to one of our Fertility Matters at Work members recently. He's a managing director at a national high street bank. And he was saying it's absolutely the future, that we have to support employees through this, sustain the global economy, to support the future of the bank, all of these kind of real business reasons. So yeah, absolutely it has to. And Fertility Matters at Work are leading the way on this, and we are convinced that eventually every industry and every organisation will be fertility friendly. There's also a few MPs who are working on this, Alice MacDonald and Matt Twain. So they're asking employers to sign the fertility pledge. It's a pledge at the moment, but they're campaigning to turn that into law, and that's paid time off, or time off at least, manager training and support and storytelling and awareness events.
Hopefully this a part of that journey of bringing this into the on the show and getting people to think about it a little bit differently. Thank you so much for joining me for an episode full of insight for me and learning on a really important subject. We're going to start now by opening the HR L&D vault. So I've got 4 short, sharp questions for you. The first is this: what's one piece of advice you wish you had received at the beginning of your career?
I was brought up to believe that you can work hard and achieve anything. And my fertility challenges have shown me that is not true, that you can't work hard at everything.
Okay, very good, very powerful. What's one piece of advice you think every HR leader needs to adopt and take on board for 2026?
Just listen to what your employees are saying, listen to what they want, listen to what will make them be the best employees that they can be.
Fantastic. What's one belief about leadership do you think needs to change?
Oh, it's probably a bit outdated now, but I think that kind of dictatorial leadership, the best leaders I know are always the people that you feel very comfortable talking to, who treat you as whole people, who want to encourage you in every aspect of your life.
Yes, the rise of the empathetic leader. I love the idea there's no real makeup of what a great leader is either. We think there is.
No.
And every study shows that, which is interesting. A bit of fun, but I'm actually going to ask you one extra question after this because I want to finish on the right tone on what is a very serious conversation, but it's a bit of a fun question, really. If you could sum up the world of human resources into what might be a famous film, book, quote, what would it be and why?
I'm going to go for a quote. It's not a famous one, but I do remember, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I do remember someone saying to me that they'd once been to HR about something and they just got a sort of verbal hug, that nothing actually happened, but they just made to feel it would be all right and everything was better. And actually, now that I'm doing this kind of work and meeting so many HR people, it's not true. HR people are absolutely core to a business. They really bring everyone together and make it successful. So that quote's an old one now that I will dispel.
Works for me. So I'm going to finish on this note, if that's all right. What is one sentence that every employee undergoing fertility treatment deserves to hear from their employer?
How can I support you?
Love that. That's the way we should finish the show. I absolutely agree. And I think you've given us 5 brilliant questions in the end that we can ask our employees. Lots and lots of things to think about. I think it's just so much to take away. And I really hope people soundbite it and use it for their own teams. I know you did mention there are some links you want to share. I'm going to put all the links in our show notes. For those who want to find out more, you can go to jenniferelworthy.com. You can go to fertilitymattersatwork.com. I'll share your LinkedIn profile, and you're active on Instagram as well. Are there any other links you would like to share? Any other places you'd like to direct people? And I'll obviously try and put those links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I'll email everything over to you. But there's Tommy's, there's Sam's, there's the Ectopic Pregnancy Trust, and there's various people who are doing really good work in the Childless Not by Choice space.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much. This conversation is really going to help all of our listeners change how they think about fertility in the workplace. Right? The things do need to change. Absolutely right. We're seeing how much this impacts everyone of every sex as well, right? Men and women. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really important subject to be challenging and to be talking about. And I'm really thankful for you sharing so much of your wisdom and your own personal story of challenge and trauma as well, which I know is a courageous thing to do. And I appreciate you for sharing that with us on today's episode of the HR L&D podcast. And if you are listening to this, my recommendation is, yes, you can subscribe and follow. And I'd be really grateful if you did those things because it helps the algorithms, it helps get the show into more people's rooms and ears and eyes. But actually, more importantly for me is share this with someone. Share this with a leader, share this with someone in your HR team, share it with someone that maybe have impacted by these issues. Because I think actually that's how we can really make these conversations safer and louder and more relevant to know there is support out there and we can really start to change things step by step. Share it with someone who you think could benefit. I'd be hugely grateful and very appreciative. But Jennifer Elworthy, thank you ever so much for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast.
Thank you, Nick.
Deal is the platform to hire, manage, and pay your global team. Onboarding, offboarding, payroll, compliance, and IT access across 150 plus countries, all on infrastructure owned end to end. Companies like 11 Labs and Shopify already scale effortlessly with Deal. 11 Labs quadrupled headcount in 2025 without adding tools. So build your global team with Deal. Book your demo at deel.com/nickdayhr. If you enjoyed that conversation, you will love this one. Click here to watch our previous episode of the HR L&D podcast, where we continue exploring the ideas, the people, the insights, and the leaders who are shaping the future of work. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a future episode.